Hello everyone, welcome to lesson 10 of theme 2 GCSE Geography. We're moving on to the last element now, which is looking at urban changes on a more global scale. We spent a while focusing on national changes and redevelopments of urban and rural areas in Wales. We're going to look more now at an international global scale. We're going to look at how global cities are spread out around the world, what we mean by a global city, what we mean by a mega city, and we're going to identify issues associated with living in sparsely or densely populated areas. So pause the video here a minute as usual, go ahead and write down the title and we'll get going then, please. Okay, so first off, you're going to need the meaning of some new key terms. Some of these might be familiar, in which case you don't have to write them down, but some of them will be brand new. So we've got population density. This is the average, that's the most important word, the average number of people per square kilometre, okay? And then what that tells you is how crowded an area is. Areas either have a high population density, so they are densely populated, that means they're crowded, or they have a low population density, that means they're not very crowded, they're sparsely populated. And that's what these two are here for. Population distribution, how something is distributed is how it is spread out. So where are the densely populated areas of the world, where are the main cities, and where are the sparsely populated areas of the world? Looking at how people are spread out, that is population distribution. We've got HIC and LIC, which we should be very familiar with now, and we've got NIC. Now this is a newer term. Some countries are developing very quickly from being an LIC into not quite rich enough or developed enough to be a HIC, because they're not rich enough yet, but they're also not developed enough in terms of their ethics and their human rights and other systems within the country. So what's happening with NICs is they've got a very rapidly emerging industrial sector, lots of factories, lots of jobs being created in the secondary sector, and therefore quite a lot of money being made and an emerging middle class, but not quite powerful enough or developed enough yet to be a HIC. NIC examples would be countries like China, India, and the sort of nickname that they've been given is the Asian tigers. They're sort of creeping up on us very quickly, becoming quite powerful and quite rich quite quickly, but like I said, not developed enough in terms of their infrastructure and their human rights and morals and ethics to be HICs yet. So any of those terms that you're unfamiliar with, pause the video here and put them down, please. Okay, so let's have a look at population density and distribution on a choropleth map. A choropleth map, if you remember, is a map where the colours mean something. Lightest means the least of something, through to the darkest means the most of something. It could be which areas of the world consume the most cake. All right, now in this case, obviously, it's which areas of the world have the most or least people living in them, but choropleth maps are used to show patterns, distribution of the most through to the least of anything. Okay, in our case, obviously, we're looking where the most people through to the least people are. So the lightest colours areas have the lowest population density. They are sparsely populated areas. Through to the darkest purple areas have the highest population density. These are densely populated areas. What I'd like you to do, put a subheading, a choropleth map showing global population density and distribution. Cut and stick this map from the handout that goes with this lesson. If you don't have a printer, just leave a space for when we come back, I'll give you a spare. And I would like you to copy and complete these questions. Now for number 1 and 2, if you just Google a world map, you'll be able to identify 5 countries that are lightly coloured and be able to name them, and then 5 countries that are dark in colour on this map and be able to name them. For number 3, I'd like you to describe the global population distribution. Describe, remember, means just say what you see. So where is it lightly coloured most and where is it darkly coloured most? Refer to continents and countries and use compass direction. So the kind of thing I'm looking for there really is North America, South America, most of Africa, Northern Europe, and most of Oceania are sparsely populated, whereas Southeast Asia and Western Europe are densely populated. So what I've done there is I've used the continent names and I've used compass directions to refer directly to which areas have a lot of people and which areas don't. Number 4, explain why there are a lot of people in some areas and not many people in others. So for example, this area of the world doesn't have many people living in it. What do we find here? The Amazon rainforest, really thick vegetation. That's going to be difficult to farm in, it's going to be difficult to build in. Up here, all the way along here, you're right on the edge of the Arctic Circle. So the cold climate will make farming difficult. There won't be enough food. Conversely, here, the Sahara Desert, it's too hot for farming. So that will mean there'll be food shortages. These areas have a lot of people living in them, probably because something linked to the fact that they've got extensive coastlines. They're all close to the sea. This makes it easier to trade by ship. You're going to make more money, there'll be more jobs, more people want to be there. So for number 1 and 2, it's literally just name some countries. The 3, describe how the crowded areas and less crowded areas are spread out. Number 4, try to offer some reasons for why some areas are less crowded and some areas are more crowded. Think about climate, think about mountain ranges, for example. The Andes Mountains running down the west coast of South America, far too steep to build on. And then why some areas might be more crowded. Have they got extensive coastlines so it's easy to trade? So pause the video here a moment, title, map, attempt those questions. You can either copy the question and put a shorter answer, or you can go in with full sentences. Okay, so let's run through number 4 in particular. So there are several factors that affect population density, that affect whether you will have a lot of people in an area or not. Natural factors, first off, the climate. If it's too dry to farm, you're not going to get many people there because you can't make enough food. If it's too cold to farm or too hot to farm, again, if you're not going to make enough food, people aren't going to want to live there. Ecosystems, dense rainforest for example, it's very, very difficult to build in the middle of a rainforest. So Central Africa, where the Congo rainforest is, northern South America, where you've got the Amazon rainforest, that thick vegetation makes it very, very difficult to build, very difficult to transport materials and trade. Not many people are going to live there. Finally, the relief. If it's mountainous, like the Andes Mountains running down the western edge, not left-hand side, down the western edge of South America, it's too steep to build on, too steep to farm on, people aren't going to want to live there. That also links into climate as well. The more mountainous the area, the colder and wetter it's probably going to be, so it's not very nice to live in. If we scale this down to looking at Wales, I'm not going to start again, we'll just roll with it. If we scale it down to looking at Wales, we know that mid-Wales has a low population density because that's where the Cambrian Mountains are. It's too cold, it's too wet, it's too steep. And finally, natural disasters. Areas that are prone to earthquakes or have a high flood risk, that are dangerous to live in for whatever reason, if they can avoid it, people will not choose to live there. Now that's not to say that some earthquake zones in the world don't have high population densities. California, for example, is right on the San Andreas Fault. California already existed before we fully understood that earthquakes will always happen there. So there are some exceptions, but in general, if an area is at risk from natural disasters, people will not want to live there. There'll be low population densities. The exception being, of course, volcanic eruptions, because volcanic eruptions make very fertile soils. So you've got large cities like Naples, for example, right in the shadow of Mount Vesuvius, because the farmland is so productive. There are human factors to consider as well. Usually whether the location is close to the coastline or if it's landlocked. So coastline means it's easier to trade and you're going to get a lot of tourism. Both of those things create jobs and bring money to the economy, so people are going to want to be there because of the opportunities that it offers. If you're landlocked, however, like Mali, for example, in sub-Saharan Africa, it's harder to trade, fewer jobs, lower population density. Put a subheading, factors affecting population density, and make some bullet point notes of these things for future reference, should you need to explain population density again in the future. Okay, so let's look a little bit more into population distribution, how our cities in particular are spread out. So this is an image taken from space at night. It's patched together from several different images, of course, because the whole world isn't in darkness at the same time. Half is facing the sun and half is facing away at any given moment. So it's patched together from different satellite images to give an image of the whole world at night from space. The lighter areas are light pollution. They are where lights and street lights, building lights, whatever, are turned on and can be picked up by satellite imagery. What do you notice about where most of the world's cities are located? Have a little look. Is there any pattern to where people have chose to build cities? If you notice, there's very few cities in the centre of a lot of continents. Africa is a good example. South America is a good example. Even here in USA and Canada, in North America, here as well. Central kind of Eastern Europe and Eastern Europe and Eastern Asia. In the centre of Australia as well, in Oceania. So people, for some reason, tend to live not in landlocked countries if they can help it. So city growth is happening mostly around our coastlines. Most of these lit up areas are close-ish to the edges, to the coast. Because coasts mean trade, and trade means money, and money means development. And development means growing cities. Where in the world do you think the highest rate of urbanisation? Urbanisation is the term given to the growth of an urban area. So where in the world are cities growing the most rapidly, do you think? HICs, LICs, NICs? We do have some urban growth in HICs in rich countries, of course we do. But it's the LICs and NICs that are developing the most rapidly. And what this is meaning is over half the world's populations now live in urban areas. This is more than ever before. Our cities are growing faster than ever before. The growth of these urban areas is known as urbanisation. Now, urbanisation is especially quick in newly industrialised countries in Southeast Asia, like we were talking about India and China, and in Latin America. For example, Mumbai, India, due to migration from rural areas, the high birth rate associated with LICs as well. So there's immigration into LIC and NIC cities, and there's high birth rates still in LIC and NIC cities. And both of those things combined, along with rapid industrialization and job creation in that sector, is meaning that these cities are growing very, very fast. This growth has led to a phenomenon known as megacities. Okay, a megacity is a city with a population of more than 10 million residents. In the mid-1900s, there were only two megacities, Hong Kong and New York. Fast forward to nowadays, only 100 years or so later, there are 28 megacities, 16 of which are located in Asia. Only 3 megacities are actually located in Europe, and they are Moscow in Russia, Istanbul in Turkey, and London in the UK. What this tells us is actually the most rapid population growth and the most rapid city growth, and therefore development, is actually happening in LICs and NICs. And that's where a lot of the power is, in megacities, in Asia, not actually in Europe. And this is where this kind of emerging Asian tiger sort of concept is coming from. They're becoming very powerful, very large, very rich, very quickly, and creeping up on how developed we are. What I'd like you to do, you do not need to write all of this down. I would like you, however, to write down what urbanisation means and what a megacity is. So just these 2 bits that I've underlined. Pause the video here a moment and write those down, please. So from both the choropleth map and from the nocturnal nighttime map that we just looked at, we can see that some areas of the world are very densely populated and some areas of the world are sparsely populated. And depending on whether the area is crowded or not, that brings different challenges. Okay? There's going to be about 3 or 4 bullet points on either side of this. So split about half a page worth of space in half. Issues in sparsely populated areas, so areas of the world where there are not many people living, and issues in densely populated areas, so areas of the world that are overcrowded with lots of people living in them. Pause the video here a moment and go ahead and set that up, please. Okay, take a moment to think to yourself, if there's not many people in an area, what problems could that create? This is actually the most difficult side of the table, I think. It's easier to think of issues in crowded areas where there's too many people. But if an area doesn't have enough people, what challenges could that bring? It's going to mean that you haven't got a massive population to work in all the jobs that you need to run a successful economy, a strong economy. So if you haven't got very many economically active people in an area, you're going to have quite a weak economy, because if you've got low numbers of working population, that's less taxes going into the economy. And if the economy doesn't have much money, then that means that your services, your infrastructure, all of that isn't going to have money going into it, being invested into it. So you're going to have quite poor public transport networks, lack of infrastructure, so power cuts, not very good internet connection, and your education and healthcare services aren't going to be very good either, because there's not the money going into them. It's quite a weak economy. On the other hand, if an area's got too many people, this is going to lead to housing shortages. And in LICs and NICs, this usually leads to shanty towns. So shanty towns is the overall kind of umbrella term for informal settlements. In India, they're known as slums. In South America, they're known as favelas. Housing shortages in HICs tends to have a slightly different impact. We end up more in terms of having issues with homelessness and people living on the streets. Pressure on services. Too many people, your healthcare system isn't going to be able to cope. GP surgeries will be overrun, hospitals will be overrun, healthcare provision will suffer. There'll be pressure on resources as well. There won't be enough food and water to go around. And that means in LICs or in areas that are drought-stricken, people are going to be drinking from contaminated water supplies because there's no other choice. And that's going to spread diseases like cholera and increase the death rate, which then, of course, puts further pressure on healthcare services. And if there's not enough food to go around, people are going to starve to death. Food shortage is known as famine. And finally, pressure on infrastructure. You'll get power cuts, you'll get traffic congestion on the roads. We've all seen the images on social media and in the news of people literally riding on the tops and clinging onto the sides of trains and buses in places like India. It's because the network simply can't cope with the number of people that are trying to use it. You then also get a lot of air pollution, and in subtropical countries like India and China, that creates smog because there's such high levels of traffic congestion mixing with the humid conditions. It creates like a smoky fog, I meant to say, at ground level, which is a really bad health hazard. And quite often then you get a lot of the other infrastructure networks like sewage pipelines and things like that can't cope with the amount of human waste. And in countries that get a lot of heavy rain, like India in the monsoon season, for example, that washes all the sewage out of the underground network and through the streets, and of course causes lots of contamination and diseases spread rapidly then. So pause the video here a moment, make some quick notes about what challenges different areas of the world face, depending on whether there's not many people living there or there's too many people living there. Okay, and that brings us to the end of lesson 10. Well done. As usual, any issues or questions that you've got, feel free to drop me an email, gleasona@hubcymru.net. Otherwise, I'll see you for the next lesson soon.